The French Republic, the sixth economy on the planet and the second economy of the EU, directly behind Germany. France is one of the most important economic, political, and military powers in the world. It's a member of the G7, the 7 most important industrialized countries on Earth, a permanent member of the UN Security Council with veto power to block resolutions, and one of 5 countries authorized to carry nuclear weapons under the UN Non-Proliferation Treaty, rendering them the 3rd nuclear power behind Russia and the United States. The stability of France is not just a key component to the current world order, but it plays a fundamental role in the development and continuous integration of the EU. Without France, there is no Europe. It's as simple as that. The French culture and language is recognized all over the world. Along with English and a few other languages, French is considered to be an important diplomatic language, not only in the continent of Europe, but worldwide. But today, France and its president, Emmanuel Macron, are facing a very serious political and republican crisis. While the executive branch tries to reform the country at the same time, the country resists and struggles to defend its ideals, as it always has been a characteristic of France, but this time, things are different. Macron is considered by many to be the last hope to reform France. If he fails, then the next party of extreme right or extreme left could take power, and this could be detrimental to the integrity of the EU and the current position of France in the world and the continent. Armored tanks have never rolled over Paris. The Arc de Triomphe has never been destroyed, and in recent history, no French Revolution has led to countless deaths, injuries, and arrests within the country. But France is slowly building up to a civil conflict that might potentially lead to the fall of the 5th French Republic. If this were to happen, it is unknown what will follow. Today we will see how France even arrived to this point, and we will discuss their current situation. Let's jump right in. Saturday, December 8th, 2018, Paris, France. More than 10,000 demonstrators, known in French as les Gilets jaunes or the Yellow Jackets, flooded the streets of the French capital. The images seen were more reminiscent to the Arab Spring than the most known street in the world's 6th economy. Dozens of burning cars littered the streets as fire and smoke rose over the Arc de Triomphe and spread throughout the Paris skies. The Arc de Triomphe, a republican emblem of France, is vandalized by demonstrators. Several shops are also destroyed and looted. The damage is estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands of euros. In the streets, riot police with their armored trucks attempted to contain the demonstrators, blocking the main streets leading to the Élysée Palace, the seat of the French executive branch, where President of the French Republic Emmanuel Macron, the second most powerful man in Europe behind Vladimir Putin, lives. The protests weren't only in Paris, as it also occurred in hundreds of French cities throughout the territory. The Yellow Vest protests are the most recent social movement against the president, who won the 2017 elections against his far-right rival Marine Le Pen. The vast majority of analysts declared Le Pen as a risk not only for France, but for all of Europe. Even so, she managed to obtain 33% of the votes of the second round, demonstrating that 1/3 of the French electorate was positioned as anti-establishment. Macron, a man that has never had an elected position, being Minister of Economy under Hollande's administration, ran for presidency and won. Not only that, but his new party, La République En Marche, won the majority in the National Assembly, giving Macron not only the power of the executive branch, but also legislative power, making him the youngest and most powerful president of the Republic in decades, a true Jupiterian president as he calls himself. Macron was elected under the promise of reforming France, to change it profoundly. A powerful country without a doubt, but it has a stagnant economy, high unemployment, an unbearable public debt, tax deficiencies accumulating, and immigration that doesn't stop increasing. Thus, Macron, having legislative and executive power in his favor, began to reform France, a country with a barely growing economy, a highly indebted state with continuous deficits and unemployment that never drops below 8%. It is the country with the highest unemployment in Western Europe, excluding the Iberian Peninsula. So how do we reduce unemployment in one of the most rigid labor markets in Europe, where labor protection is broad and unions often clash with the government? Macron's response has been that France should have a more flexible labor market. In other words, make it easier to hire and fire staff and employees, a measure that hypothetically would motivate companies to hire more. This was established with the French labor law at the beginning of 2018. The new law broadened the margin in which companies could maneuver to negotiate modalities with workers, rendering the process of hiring and firing easier, and established guidelines within companies to negotiate with their workers their resignation or dismissal to reduce litigation within courts. Even so, France is still one of the countries with the most labor protection laws in all of Europe. The labor law is widely contested and very controversial, but a reduction of 30% has been observed in the litigation of workers and employees. This is a good sign. However, more than 1 year has passed and unemployment has not lowered more than 1%. Many economists believe that France has a particular problem with unemployment. The unemployment found within the country is what is known as structural unemployment, which means that the cause is strongly rooted in the French economy and therefore is the most difficult of all types of unemployment to resolve. Although, it is not as serious as in Spain, where it exceeds 15%. It is still not on par with its neighbors with the same level of development, such as Germany or the UK, where unemployment is only at 4%. This high unemployment, the high cost of living, high taxes, the reduction of taxes for the rich, and minimum wage that doesn't progress are just some of the demands of the so-called Yellow Vests, a social movement that exploded since the month of November 2018 when Macron announced a tax and gasoline increase to compensate for the ecological footprint of France. This, according to the movement, was the straw that broke the camel's back. France is one of the most expensive countries to live in Europe, and where income taxes are generally among the highest in the world, is among 12 countries with relatively higher taxes on income, with an average of 30%, surpassing the UK, where it's 23%, and Japan, with 22%. Above all, France is the champion of Europe in tax matters. The French state lives on credit constantly, every single year. Macron knows that this situation cannot continue, especially considering the aging population. For the third year in a row, France registers the highest level of taxes in 2017, according to data published by Eurostat. Last year, tax revenues, which includes taxes, duties, and contributions, weighed 48.4% of GDP in France, comparing to 47.3% in Belgium and 46.5% in Denmark. The objective of President Macron's fiscal reform is to change this, but it will not be easy in the short term. Thanks to this reform, Macron has obtained the nickname the President of the Rich, since one of its measures was the suppression of the ISF, also known as the tax on fortune. According to calculations made by the Institute of Public Policies, or the IPP for short, the middle class and the richest households were the big winners of the fiscal policy of Emmanuel Macron. On the contrary, the most modest households and the pensioners were most punished due to the virtual freezing of their benefits and pensions. You can see that the richest 1% of the population had an explosive variation of 6% on their income after the reform. The fiscal reform is just one of the small reforms that the so-called Jupiterian president is doing. Other reforms include the privatization of the National Railway Company, also known as the SNCF, and the possibility that private train companies could operate in the French railway system, where before it was only the National Train Company, could now operate in a monopoly. This led to many protests that lasted for months throughout France of the railroads that hindered the transport of the country and produced significant economic losses. A very substantial reform is its educational reform, and this is where it becomes interesting because this also affects me personally as I am currently a student in a French public university. Within the French constitution, it is established that every potential student has the right to access higher education. That is, there is no filter to enter university, but this system also has its drawbacks. In the first year of university, faculties meet hundreds of thousands of students who drop out or do not take their studies seriously. At this rate, a university year in France, which normally costs on average 150 euros, will not continue to maintain the significantly low price. To reduce the failure rate in universities, increase the reputation of French higher education, and give them more financial means, the Macron administration has made three major reforms. Firstly, the implementation of a system of selectivity for all national students who wish to enter. For the first time within the Republic, universities can filter candidacies and leave those not accepted waiting, but they cannot reject them, since it is considered to be unconstitutional. Secondly, starting next year, non-European students will have to pay 20 times more than what was paid before. For undergraduate studies, 1 year of university could go from $250 to $3,000, and for masters, $350 to more than $4,000. Thirdly, in the long term, raise the cost of tuition from 150 euros to 1,000 euros for all French and European students and gradually increase to non-European students, which could reach up to $5,500. Evidently, these reforms met great rejection throughout all of France, which has resulted in violent protests and blockades of universities throughout the country. The French feel that their president is too far gone from the people, and they feel that he has no humility, that his proclaimed status of being a Jupiterian president has elevated him to a special level that he doesn't want to lose. And for that reason, for more than 7 consecutive weekends, the Yellow Vests have caused destruction throughout Paris and roadblocks of institutions throughout France, which causes major losses to the French economy, estimated to be in the millions of euros. Macron had the option of not listening to the demands of the Yellow Vests and continuing on that path, or he can go back and abandon the status of being a Jupiterian and almighty president. After several weeks of lootings, millions in losses, damage to the Arc de Triomphe, hundreds of injured civilians and policemen, the French president stepped back and gave in to the Yellow Vests by withdrawing the announced gas tax and announcing an increase in the minimum wage by 100 euros, which will now go from 1,500 to 1,600 euros, for a total of 1,200 euros net after taxes. It was the first time in his term that President Macron stepped back on one of his proposals, seeing the mess caused throughout the entire country. Macron's reforms do not stop here. There are a number of reforms in all key sectors. One, for example, energy, where France depends 75% on nuclear energy, being the country with the most nuclear reactors in the world, just after the United States. The president of France wants to change this, but getting the country to get rid of its nuclear dependence will not be easy. It will be a very expensive and long-term investment. Macron, who began his term with approval ratings of 55%, now has just 33%, with more than 2/3 of France rejecting his mandate and supporting the movement of the Yellow Vests. He even announced the withdrawal of the gas tax and raising the minimum wage by 100 euros. The movement continued, despite a reduction in participation. The president was a key political piece that took out two of the largest parties of power within a bipartisan system, the Socialists on the left and the Republicans on the right. Failure to reform with the support of the French public. Macron might very well not be re-elected in 2021. This gives way to two possible candidates, Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the extreme left or Marion Maréchal Le Pen, niece of Marine Le Pen, of the far right. This is the last chance that Macron has to reform France, before it falls under the populism of the extreme right or left, which both can be dangerous for the Republic. This subject is so vast that another video will be necessary to explore this topic further in order to analyze how the situation evolves. So I pass the question off to you. What do you think of the current crisis in France? Should the president resign, or should he continue like this until the end of his legitimate term? I hope you like this video and leave your take in the comments below.